Mark Cuban was interviewed by Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC after Kamala Harris spoke at the Economic Club of Pittsburgh. And Mark Cuban, during these interviews, absolutely ripped into and exposed Donald Trump on all three of those major networks. So take a look at those three interviews.
You've had an about face. Can you just tell us your Donald Trump story?
Yeah, I mean, I've known him for 25 years. And, I've had various interactions with him, got to, talk to him. We weren't best friends, but in 2015, when he came down the escalator, in 2016, early on, I was like, okay, this guy is not a traditional politician. But I also presumed that he would start to learn and really take an interest in the job and what it takes to run the country and, learning the issues and the details. And I got to the point where I realized he had no interest in learning. He had no interest in details. He had no interest in really finding out what it takes to be successful with any policy. And it was kind of crazy. One time I spoke negatively about him, and he sent me the way he sends an email, right? He writes it out, somebody scans it, and then someone sent that as an email to me, and he said, "What happened?" And literally what I said to him is, "Donald, you're not taking the time to learn the issues. You're not taking the time to learn the details. That is a problem that I can't support." And that's where we kind of diverged and went in our different directions. And he hasn't changed. No one talking about Donald Trump says, boy, that really was a nuanced position. Boy, he really was able to show us a detailed policy depth on what he was talking about. It's the exact opposite. Whenever Donald Trump says something, everybody else has to explain for him what he said, right? He can't ever, it's never like, okay, I'll get to that. I didn't convey it right. I'll give you the details on why I said what I said. It's the opposite. It's all his acolytes, all his supporters saying, no, this is what he really meant. It's the opposite with Vice President Harris. When she says what she says, everybody knows what she means. That is such a stark difference between the two.
On a recent Harris campaign call, you compared policy proposals made by Trump to those from independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who's a socialist. What do you mean?
Well, it was a race for socialism, right? Bernie said that credit card companies should cap their rates, their interest rates at 15%. Donald Trump, being the socialist that he is, had to beat Bernie. So Donald Trump went out and recommended that interest rate caps be set to 10%. The fact that he's even suggesting price controls and price caps is socialism 101. You haven't heard that from the vice president. You have heard that from Donald Trump.
Well, then how do you interpret?
How
do you interpret what she's doing in terms of price gouging, taking on price gouging by food companies? Because a lot of critics have said that is a form of price controls.
I'm glad you asked me that, Jake, because taking on price gouging is not price controls. She's not saying what the price of tomatoes should be. What she's saying is when there's a crisis, and there will be other crises, there'll be hurricanes, there'll be tornadoes, there'll be floods, there'll be other disasters. And when those disasters happen, she wants to be in a position to be able to say, no, you can't jack up those prices by 40%. You have to stay within a particular realm, a particular guideline. And by the way, there are already 37 states that have similar guidelines. All she's doing is saying we're just going to make that a national law. So that's certainly not price caps or price controls at all. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is the king of price caps.
All right, Mark Cuban, always good to see you, sir. Thanks so much.
Mark, you argue that, and it's always good to have you, you argue that Donald Trump's are particularly, I think you used the word insane. What did you mean by that?
Yep. Well, first of all, strategic tariffs aren't bad. So if a company's trying to dump, or a country's trying to dump in the United States and we have a manufacturer there, tariff them, that's great. But across the board tariffs, 10 or 20%, is just inflationary. It's a tax on the American consumer. But to make matters even worse, and what's truly insane, when you threaten a legendary company like John Deere with a 200% tariff if they move, but only a 10 or 20% tariff on China, what you're doing is you're making it easy for the Chinese competitors to take business away from John Deere. That is the definition of insane.
A lot of your business colleagues say the definition of insane is supporting Kamala Harris. Yet you do. You're a smart, savvy businessman. You came from nothing to be a multi-billionaire. So you're pretty good at what you do. What do you see in her that you don't see in Donald Trump?
I think she's thorough. If you look at Donald, right, when he talks about his policies, they're very impetuous, they're impulsive, they're set to match whatever's happening at a rally. Whereas with the Harris campaign and Kamala herself, she's very, very thorough. She's very precise. Her team really vets every idea. And to me, that's important as a business person because you can trust what she says. Think about what happens when Donald comes out and says, I'm going to put a 10% cap on credit card interest rates. The next thing that happens isn't that he explains why, it's that everybody around him explains what he says. He can't explain it for himself. Everybody's got to explain for him. Or whether it's a 10 or 20 or 60% tariff, or the 200% on John Deere. With Kamala Harris, no one has to explain for her. She takes the time to vet her policies thoroughly. And when she says them and presents them, they are what they are. They're self-explanatory.
I always love when we get amazing clips like these from Mark Cuban, because it shows that all of the people who say that they like Trump because he's good for the economy and because he's a businessman clearly just have no idea what they're talking about. We have one of the most successful businessmen in this country saying that Trump is not good for the economy or the people, and people will still think that Trump should be president. And those people also fail to recognize that the rest of the businessmen who support Trump do so because 1, he is one of them, but 2, because he will lower their taxes and make laws that help them out. Because of course you're going to like the guy who's giving you free money. Mark Cuban is just one of those rare businessmen that cares more about people and will call out Trump for his lies and scams. So overall, Mark Cuban made some really good points and explained why Trump would be a disaster to this country. And he explained that Kamala Harris would be a great president over Trump, not just because of her economic policies, but also because Trump is not willing to put in the effort to be a good president. And personally, I know that I want a president who actually cares about the American people, not just some failed businessman trying to stay out of prison.